Ecclesiastes chapter 5. As we have seen pretty easily thus far, this book is a book dedicated to life under the sun. Life for us is under the sun. And the emphasis may be on everything under the sun. Ecclesiastes 3 talks about to everything there's a season. He's talked in chapter 1 how he's seen everything. He's seen all things. So the emphasis may appear to be on everything under the sun, but it doesn't overlook everything above the sun. In fact, this book is special because it highlights our life as we know it, which Solomon says all is vanity. But everything under the sun is put into perspective when you look at everything above the sun. And he is going to do that in this chapter. He's going to emphasize getting your mind out of just everything under the sun and looking above it. But if you look in the Bible and even in just life in general, you'll notice that the people who live the worst lives in this world, the people who live the worst lives under the sun, are those who deny any existence of a being above the sun. And the people who have the hardest time down here are the people who have the hardest time understanding up there. There's a direct correlation. It's undeniable. How we view God above will directly impact how we live life below. The wicked, it says in Psalm 10:4, through the pride of his countenance will not seek after God. God is not in all of his thoughts. He's not aware of God. He doesn't care about God. He doesn't think about God. And as a result of not looking beyond the sun, his life is plagued with wickedness. The greater our awareness of God, the more likely we will be to do the right thing. The less we think of God, the less conscious we are of God, the less sensitive we are to the presence of God, the more likely we will be to do the wrong thing. Foolishness is the result of living life void of an awareness of God. Foolishness is the result of living life void of an awareness of God, a constant awareness of God. And a life of foolishness leads a trail of mistakes, a trail of regret, and a trail of failure. And Ecclesiastes 5 will emphasize the one who's above the sun as we live life below the sun, because that will directly impact the quality of life we have by impacting the decisions we make. And that's the big picture of Ecclesiastes. And I continue to beat this drum of supporting Solomon and his writing style and his background. I've come to believe, actually, without any biblical proof, that Solomon, although he walked away from God when he was old, I've begun to believe that he came back to the Lord. I have a real hard time believing that he stayed away from the Lord. And you say, well, there's no evidence of that. You know what? It depends where you look in the Bible to find out if Manasseh ever repented. One book will tell you he never repented because it never mentions it. Another book will tell you he did repent. And so just because it's not in the Bible doesn't mean Solomon didn't get right with God. But I believe he did, and I believe he had enough sense in his older years to look backwards and realize he got distracted. He focused way too much on things below than on things above. And everything under the sun has to be seen with everything above the sun in mind. This is the big picture, making sure you're seeing the whole universe, including the heaven that sits at the top of it, not just our earth, our planet, and ask, where is God, or why does it matter? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, without a thought of God. That's a mistake. But eat, drink, and be merry with the awareness that God blesses you, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we'll see that in this chapter. So we're going to go through just 4 practical things in this chapter, make quite a few comments, and hopefully be a help to you this evening. But we'll note, number 1, that Solomon was giving us instruction to have an awareness of God and how we worship. Verse number 1, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he writes, "Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God." Remember I just said I don't think Solomon is writing this from a backslidden perspective, or he's a wicked man who's walked away from God, or he's a man who's discouraging us from focusing on the spiritual or focusing on the eternal, or he's telling us to avoid God or reject God or go into carnal directions. No, he understands right out of the gate here, you need to be in the house of God. You need to be in the temple. He didn't say, if you go to the house of God, keep your foot. He said, when thou goest into the house of God, keep thy foot, because you need to be there, because we need to be there. In his day, it was the temple. In our day, it's the church. And here he is starting off by talking about our feet. Now, he's not talking about our right foot or our left foot. He's not talking about when we get into the house of God that we keep it there and never leave. He's not referring to the body part. He's referring to that which would indicate our direction. When you talk about your feet, be careful where your feet go. Well, my brain tells my feet where to go. So why aren't we just talking about my decision making? Because it's a way to get you to think. In Proverbs chapter 4, Solomon would write similar words. He would say, ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. He's not referring to your physical foot. He's referring to the direction you're going in, the location you're in. He's referring to the decisions you're making, the movement that you are having. And here we have at the beginning of this chapter a call for caution when going into the house of God. And he's calling us to be grave, to have some gravity, to have some sobriety, to have some reverence, to have some awareness of God. Verse 1, keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they consider not that they do evil. A fool, when he enters the temple, is not aware of God, either in his entirety or in some ways inconsistency. He approaches the house of God casually. He approaches it loosely. He doesn't take his decisions seriously. He doesn't take his hasty activity seriously, and doesn't even realize the evil that he's engaging in within the house of God. Fools rush to do their religious duty. Fools haste to make their convictions, or their confessions rather, and their vows. Fools go through the motions without any sincerity and without any reverence before God. And Solomon says, this is an evil under the sun. He says to us as readers, when you go to the house of God, be cautious, be careful, keep thy foot, know what you're about to do, know the decisions you're going to make, think through them, process them. Don't take it lightly. Contemplate, evaluate before you make any hasty statement. We ought to have a holy reverence for God when we come into his house. James 1:19 tells us, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak. We ought to be very careful with what we say in the house of God. Verse number 2, he says, be not rash, be not hasty with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. He's not saying don't say anything when you get into the house of God. He's not saying, hey, don't even say a word because God will hold you accountable. You're better off not saying anything because in that way you won't have to do anything and you won't get in trouble if you don't get it done. He's just saying, hey, be quick to listen. Think about what you're hearing, and before you agree to something, or before you say something, or before you come and pledge something to God, don't just say anything. Don't be so hasty just to put it out there. What you are going to say, take time to think about it. Again, be prepared. Think it through thoroughly before you speak. Again, be not rash, verse 2, with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God, for God is in heaven, and thou upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. That phrase, as simple as it may be, is the foundation for this chapter and truthfully for the book. We think this book is all about everything under the sun. And it's all vain, by the way. And I've seen everything. And he goes through all of these elements of life under the sun. But he just says there, hey, when you go into the house of God, be careful what you say. Think it through. Have an awareness of God because he's in heaven and you're on earth. In other words, your life is under the sun, but he's above the sun. We're down here, he's up there. We're the creature, he's the creator. Keep in mind that even though we can't see him, even though he may not physically be here, he's over all. He sees everything. He hears everything. He knows everything. He's watching life under the sun. We are temporal. God is eternal. We are in this world. God is out of this world. Therefore, we must have an awareness of God's lofty position as overseer. Knowing who God is, knowing where God is, the instruction is to let thy words be few. Our level of consciousness of God determines our approach to life. It determines our approach to worship. If we take God lightly, if we don't take Him seriously, if we don't appreciate the fact that He's in heaven and we're here, if we don't appreciate that He's omnipresent, He's omniscient, He's omnipotent, then we will approach worship with a lack of reverence. And we will find ourselves ensnared in some evil that God will not take lightly. The person who casually commits to a ministry opportunity with little to no intent to fulfill that commitment does so foolishly without an awareness of God. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Verse number 3, as we go through this verse by verse, Solomon then writes an interesting statement. He says, "For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words." What's he saying there? And what does that have to do with our awareness of God in the house of God? And sometimes if you don't read the entire context, you don't know what that statement is referring to, and you can pull it out and think that Solomon's just saying a few things, I guess, to bring light to dreams or words of a fool. But this has everything to do with the context. He's saying, just as dreams reveal a multitude of business, fools are revealed by a multitude of words. If you are given to dreams at night, your mind never rests. You wake up in the morning, you say, "What did I dream last night?" You wake up and you combine all of your fears, all of your worries, all of your day's activities into one dream. Your spouse has the body of a dog, and your children are eating, aliens, and you wake up and you just ask yourself, what just happened? That's a product not of eating mushrooms on your pizza the night before. It's a product of a multitude of business. You're busy all day long. You have a lot of activity all day long, a lot of things going through your mind, and you can't process all of that. When you lay down at night, your mind is still going, and unconsciously it takes all these thoughts and mixes them together, and heads change bodies, and bodies change legs, and you have all this stuff going on, and you say, why did I have all that dreams? Because you got a lot going on. Dreams reveal a multitude of business. And he says that to make sense of what's more important here, and that is a fool is revealed or manifested because there's a multitude of words. A fool talks a lot. When you find someone who's constantly yakking, you have found yourself a fool. And a fool that walks into the house of God yakking does so without an awareness of God. It's a mistake. Verse number 4. When, not if, when thou vowest a vow unto God. Now, I say when and emphasize that in connection to verse 1 because, again, Solomon's not discouraging our worship. He's not discouraging people from vowing unto God. He's promoting worship. He's promoting a relationship with God. He's promoting a growth spiritually. But he needs to give some counsel. Verse 4, when thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not, delay not, don't postpone to pay it, referring to the vow. For he, God, hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Again, fools are yakety-yak, don't come back. And they're talking and talking and talking, and they approach it casually and flippantly. And Solomon's saying, don't do that with God. He's in heaven. We're down here. You may get away with that with your neighbor. You may promise something and not fulfill it with your neighbor. You can't do that with God. Have an awareness of God when you come into His house. Have an awareness of God when you make decisions and ultimately commitments to God. Now, you may interpret these words as elementary. Well, obviously, Solomon, we wouldn't do that. Let me caution you. Those of you who have been in church for any length of time, especially in our circles where we're very religious, we show up Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, or at least Sunday morning and Sunday night, or at least Sunday morning, but we do what we do. Let me remind you how easy it is to play church. Let me remind you how easy it is to say, well, it's time for church. We get dressed for church. We get our Bible. We get in our car. We come into church. We find our friends. Sit down. We talk to our friends. We stand up, because we always stand up to sing, and we sing the songs. And then we sit down, because we always sit down when it's time for the offering, and then we listen to the instruments, because the instruments always play. And then we get up again, and we sing, because that's what we do, and then the preacher preaches, we sleep, we go home, we do this every week. Yeah. We forget how easy it is to be robotic religiously, to be a machine, to do what we do because that's what we do. Solomon is saying, don't you dare enter the church, the house of God, anytime without an awareness of God. You know, how many times do you come to church just because you don't want somebody to know you're not in church? And you sing songs because you don't want anyone to think you're not into the worship. And some of those songs have promises in those songs. I don't know if you thought about that. It's pretty easy to become casual in our worship, to become insincere. And the counsel here is simply to think before you speak. I might say think before you sing even. The counsel is to consider seriously who you're dealing with. As I mentioned this morning, you're not dealing with your pastors. Whether you do or don't do something around here, we may be involved, but at the end of the day, you're dealing with God, who is in heaven, and we are on earth. And we don't have an attendance sheet somewhere, but God does. We don't gauge how well or how sincere you sing your songs, but God does. We don't vet the decisions you make at the altar or there in your seat during or after the preaching, but God does. Don't say you're going to give up a vice or sacrifice a vice if you have no intention of truly doing that. Don't say you're going to help in a ministry event or in a ministry if you have no intention of doing that. You say, well, of course I do. Let me rephrase that. If you have no intention of doing that no matter what. In other words, it's a priority. Preach! A multitude of verbal commitments, a multitude of verbalized intentions, a multitude of words without action brings God no pleasure. Let me use an illustration to make a point, and it's not an illustration to follow this morning's message up with, any humbug type of mean pastor, take a hard line position. But the pastors here, we are responsible to manage the resources and establish ministry events, and we have to staff these things and prepare these things, so we take a lot of time to do that. And we will have sign-up sheets, and we have to find out, for example, if the men have a breakfast or the ladies have a banquet, or we're doing something that involves resources. We'll say, please sign up so we know how much food to prepare, right? And we understand that sickness happens, emergencies happen, things happen, but it is consistent that the people who sign up don't always show up. And do Pastor Phil and I, get a church membership directory after those events and mark you naughty and nice? No. But truth be told, you're wasting the church's money because we prepare for you. And when you don't come, that either goes in the garbage or goes to somebody else the best we can. You know what that is, though? It's saying you'll be here when you're not here. And it's tough for us because we're responsible for the church's finances. So we may have to get a little more difficult in the future. We typically don't charge for anything because we know that deters people from coming. But I have learned the only thing that truly motivates Christians is charging. Like, money's the only thing that works. Poor Pastor Phil, I'm like, hey, they're not going to show up. You got to get a deposit because that's the only thing that motivates us. You know what should be good enough in the house of God? And again, please, don't take this as though I'm angry with the sheep. You know what should be good enough in the house of God? Our word. Not because the pastors are mean and crabby, and if you don't show up, they'll yell at you, but because God is in heaven, and we are on earth. Be careful before you sign up for something if you have no intention of making sure you follow through with it. Now, that may be as simple as an event, maybe a ministry, with the nursery ministry. There's some things where we're looking at the nursery ministry to help it be more efficient, and One of the biggest problems we have with the ministry, and I understand it's a Rubik's Cube, but it's people saying, I'll do it, and then they don't. And it's a little frustrating if you're trying to make that work. That's how we feel as ministry leaders. I wonder how God feels when you tell God, I'll do it, but it's not a priority. Now, I'm not discouraging you from helping. We absolutely need you. But I am asking that, as Solomon is instructing, think thoroughly, evaluate consistently, and ponder it before you decide to say, count me in, preacher, because I'm going to count you in, because I'm going to take your word for it, because I should be able to, because this is God's business. Amen? Hallelujah. Verse number 5, better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. There's the proof text for that's it. Preacher wants help. No, I don't know about being there, preacher. And you'll preach against me if I don't show up on time or if I don't make it. And so the Bible says I just shouldn't vow. And better not for me to do anything. Commit. Don't take this out of context. Solomon's not saying you shouldn't commit to the Lord. He's not saying you shouldn't decide on doing something. He's just saying, hey, if you're going to do it, God would rather you not do it than say you're going to do it and not do it. Oh, good. Then, God would rather me do nothing. No. God would rather us give it all. Jesus said, if any man will be my disciple, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, this is not a break in the door that we can get out of the commitments. This is Solomon saying, take seriously what you say you're going to do, especially in your worship in the house of God. Again, an awareness of God is what helps us make reasonable commitments, and it is what helps us keep our commitments. I fear, and I understand why, it's very easy to get our eyes off of the Lord and onto man, but I fear that there's more fear of the pastor sometimes than there is of God when it comes to commitments. Preacher, I'm sorry, I won't be able to be there. All right, cool. Why? Oh, No, I don't. That's why I'm asking. ... Not a good excuse, evidently. I don't say that. But we should be afraid of our commitments to God. I know you're all thinking, preacher, you don't understand. You get paid to do this. We don't. Yes, this church, as I mentioned, is a church of volunteers. There are 3 on staff. However, the kingdom of God, there are no staff members. We're all servants of the Most High. So we have to determine who we are serving. And again, I'm suggesting you pick reasonable ministries that you can do, because Romans tells us that we are to give our bodies to the Lord. It's a reasonable service. He's not asking you to do something that's unreasonable. So you pray about it. You decide what to do. Just make sure whatever you decide, you follow through. Not because of the pastors, but because of the Lord. He is in heaven. We are on earth. Verse number 6, the first part of it says, suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Yeah, James says it this way, even so the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. I can do it. Behold, James writes, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. Promising to do something great before God without carefully considering whether or not you truly will do it often causes the flesh to sin. Let's boil it down to its most simplistic format. When you tell someone you're going to do something and you don't do it, is it safe to say that's lying? Promising to do something and not keeping your promise, what is that? It's a violation of something. And that's how Solomon wants us to see it before God. I will is a phrase that should be used sparingly and soberly. Yes is a word that should be thoroughly vetted before uttering. Verse 6 again, suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God, not the pastor, not the ministry leader, not your spouse, wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands? Again, awareness of God when you make decisions in the house of God. Who is the angel? I'm going to go back to some heresy here. I know some of you have a hard time with this. Who's the angel? What's this all about? Do you have angels coming to you at the end of Sunday to vet your decisions before the Lord? Do you have angels stopping in, hanging out, checking to see if you're doing right, keeping you accountable? Who's this angel? Solomon's writing in the Old Testament. They go to the temple. Are there angels in the Old Testament? An angel in the Bible is simply a messenger. It's what an angel is. It's what it means. It's a messenger. So whenever you find an angel in the Bible, he's delivering a message from God. That's why an evangelist has the word angel in it. An evangelist is your primary messenger to the world from the church. An angel in the Bible does not have to mean a divine being. Did you know that? Revelation has these 7 churches. There are the 7 angels of the 7 churches. If you were in my study in Revelation, you know that we talked about that. Those 7 angels of the 7 churches are 7 pastors of the 7 churches. This passage here, when Solomon writes, lest the angel, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error, he's referring to the messenger of God at the time of Solomon in the house of God. They were the priests. You see, the priest was the spiritual authority over the Hebrew worshiper of old, and the Hebrew worshiper would come to the temple. They would make their offerings. They would make their sacrifices. They would give their tithes. That's where they would make their vows. And if you didn't fulfill your vow, who was to keep you accountable? It was the Old Testament priest. And so when you come into the temple and the priest says, hey, remember that vow you made? How come your hair is cut? How come you're eating this? How come, and if you say to the priest, the messenger of God, the angel, oh, it was a mistake. It was an error. I shouldn't have made that vow. I knew I couldn't keep it. Oh, Solomon says, worst case scenario, because God is going to be angry at you and he'll destroy the work of your hands. This is akin to the guy, the husband who walks out on his wife, has an affair, and goes back to his wife and says, listen, I'm sorry. Oh, you're sorry for the affair? No, I'm sorry for ever marrying you. I should have never told you that I could make it work because I knew it wouldn't. That's the situation here. You have a guy who says to God, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I shouldn't have made that vow. That vow was a mistake because I uttered it hastily, because I talk a lot, because I'm a fool. I didn't have an awareness of you. I didn't really have a consciousness of you. That's who the angel is here. And Solomon is saying, you're going to be in big trouble if you do that to God. Verse number 7, for in the multitude of dreams and many words there are also diverse vanities. All the dreams you have, the wild dreams, they're unfulfilling, they're empty, they're not satisfactory. All the words that fools say, there's nothing of substance in them, they're empty. And Solomon says, in light of man's dreams, in light of man's words, the foolishness, fear thou God. Awareness of God. God is in heaven, we are on earth. Yeah, but everything under the sun is vanity. Hey, God is above the sun. Big picture. Yes, this world is difficult. Yes, this world is unfulfilling, but God is above. So, not if, but when we come to church, we must come in the fear of God. It'd be a great sign to have out front, wouldn't it? Before entering, do you fear God? Have some strong voice there, lightning and thunder. You're about to enter the house of God. Fear Him. It would be good. We would have a lot less gossiping. We would have a lot less busybodying. We'd have a lot less whining. We'd have a lot less critical spirits. We'd have a lot less of all the problems because we would come in the presence of God. There would be a holy reverence. Amen? When we make decisions, let us make decisions not with our pastors or our peers in mind. Let us make them with God in mind. When we make decisions here at church, let us not make them with our schedules in mind. Let us make them with our God in mind. For He is in heaven, and we are on earth. Number 2, have an awareness of God in what you witness. Have an awareness of God in what you witness. We're going to talk about oppression. Verse number 8. If thou seest, there's your witness, what you're looking at, what you observe. If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at that matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Solomon had a pretty good handle on oppression. We looked at that in our last chapter, chapter 4, verse number 1. He brought up oppression, and we dealt with that. He had seen all things. He talked a lot about it in the book of Proverbs. And for most of us, the injustice of our world is difficult to accept. We get bitter at people in general. We get bitter at others. We in particular, are moved to vengeance when people we love are oppressed or they are treated unjustly. Oppression and injustice really is tough for us to swallow. We have this, as I mentioned in our last lesson, this insatiable thirst for vengeance. And Solomon is saying here, hey, under the sun, there's oppression. It's widespread. It's vanity. It's vexing of spirit. It's terrible. However, if you see it, if you witness it, don't marvel. Don't sit there and say, how can this happen? Don't sit there and say, how come someone's not doing something? Don't marvel. For he that is in the heavens is higher than the highest. Oh, you see in a province some prince oppressing the poor. You see some king, some dictator oppressing his subjects. There's someone higher than the highest. You see it in the house of God. The priests, they're oppressing people. They're doing terrible things. Hey, marvel not. Solomon's saying, don't get all worked up. Don't take things into your own hand. Don't let that thirst for vengeance get a hold of you. There's someone above the sun. There's someone higher than the highest. In the religious circle, there's someone higher than the high priest. In the courtroom, there's someone higher than the chief justice. He's higher than us. Got to look above the sun and rest in his justice. Have an awareness of God. It will keep you from doing things you ought not to do. Paul said in Romans chapter 12, Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Once you realize that, you can do what Paul then instructs us to do. He says, Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. You know, an awareness of God, a consistent consciousness of he who is higher than us, he who is higher than the highest will do it, will liberate you from this thirst for justice and vengeance. You'll watch the news, and instead of saying, someone's got to do something about this, somebody's got to stand up for it, you'll say, hey, there's someone higher than anybody down here. He'll take care of it. In his time, in his way, he'll take care of it. I need to free my soul of the bitterness, the envy, the anger, the wrath that comes with this thirst for justice, and allow for peace, allow for love, so I can feed my enemy, so I can give thirst or give water to my enemy and allow God to do what he does. I will not be overcome of evil. I will overcome evil with good because I realize justice is God's business. Justice is God's business. If I could sum up Ecclesiastes 5 in a short phrase, it would be this. As you live under the sun, look beyond the sun. As you live in this world, get your eyes out of this world. It will help us tremendously. Verse number 9, number 3, have an awareness of God while you work. I'm going to move a little quicker through this, so pay attention. Verse number 9, moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. One commentator on this verse says it is the most textually problematic verse in the book. And he struggled with what it meant. Of course, he used a variety of versions. That does not help anything. And at first glance, you might not really be sure what this means, but when you look at it within the context of the chapter, we know God is in heaven, man is on earth. We know we're to fear God. We know that God is higher than the highest. He's higher than those who oppress. He's higher than the king referenced in here. And he's aware, by the way, of the oppression. And I think what Solomon is saying in here, in fact, I'm sure of it, Solomon is saying, moreover, God, the Creator, he who is higher than the highest, He created the earth. He's in charge of the profit of the earth. And everybody's dependent on God. The king, he himself is served by the field. He has to have a good crop for him to eat. The pauper, he's dependent upon God. It goes back to the oppression. Yeah, but look at that man is being unjust and he's oppressing the poor and he's not giving them the food that they want. Hold on there, tiger. The profit of the earth is for all. Meaning, God could take it away and the king won't have anything. God's in control of all of it. He's setting up a conversation about wealth, about working, about how we all need to be dependent upon God. We need to see our profit, our resources coming in, our increase, as though God, who is above all, who controls the earth, indeed is behind our blessings. Verse number 10. Here we go. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. If you love silver, if I love things, if I love money, if I love wealth, if you love riches, if we love possessions, you'll be sadly disappointed. They'll never satisfy. They'll never fulfill you. Question being, how much is enough? That question, well, if someone gave you $1 million, would that be enough? And you can sit here and say, well, yeah. Last I checked, these athletes are making like $40 million a year. And they're holding out because they want more. And you watch these commentators and they're saying, yeah, well, hey, they got to get it while they can. Once you get 40, you want 41. Once you get 50, you want 52. Money never satisfies. It never is sufficient. Verse 11, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? What he is saying here is increased wealth brings increased stature. Increased wealth brings increased fame and popularity. It brings increased attention. It brings increased social status. More goods means you need more servants. More goods means you need more contractors. More goods means you get a lot of interest. The person who gets the goods, he becomes more famous. He becomes more well known. And what good is it to the owners? Except he gets to see it. There's no more satisfaction. Wealth maketh many friends. I would put that in loose terms. Proverbs 19:4. Because increased wealth doesn't make a man happier. Increased wealth doesn't make a man holier. Increased wealth doesn't make a man healthier. Increased health doesn't make a man's marriage better. Increased wealth doesn't make his children closer to him. Increased wealth doesn't make a life simpler. Increased wealth doesn't make God closer to him. You got to think about that. Wealth may bring some temporal benefits, but it doesn't bring what we really want in life. Verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. This is following up those dreams. If you have dreams, you don't sleep real good. How many of you have woke up after a wild night of dreaming and you feel like, I feel like I didn't even sleep? Yeah, because your mind was on overdrive. And when you have a lot of money, you usually get that money by a lot of activity, a lot of businesses. And at night, your mind is racing. And you may be eating a lot, but you're not sleeping well. The sleep of a laboring man, it's sweet. Those of you who deal with insomnia, I feel bad for you. You've shared that with me. You know how much that impacts the rest of your life, every day of your life, the rest of the day. You know that a good night's rest is priceless. Priceless. Verse 13, there is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun. Namely, this is what he saw, riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail, and he, the wealthy man, begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand. Now, this is a really great insight. Solomon says, I've seen it. I've seen it. People get wealthy. They hold on to their money. They hoard their money. They're going to hold on to it and get richer and richer and richer. And then something happens, and they lose it all. And they offer their son nothing. There's no inheritance to pass down. He was going to have all this money for the rest of his life. And something came in and took it all away. What happened? Well, money attracts friends. Also attracts thieves. It attracts a lot of people who want it. And if you're a believer, if you're a devout believer who thinks money can be your goal, God will take it from you. God will ruin you. God does not compete with money. God will take it by illness or by tragedy, where thieves will steal it by force or by identity. But he is pointing out here the plight of the person who makes silver his satisfaction. It will ruin him. Verse 15, as he came forth of his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. We can't take a penny with us when we die. Now think about this. When we die, our loved ones may put our best clothes on us and put us in a casket, but when we die, we're dying naked, just like we came into this world. Now, listen, when you come into this world, God has designed you to come in impoverished, naked, destitute. You come in as poor as anybody else. And when you leave the same way. You see how little God cares about money? You ever think about that? God says, you're going to come in so poor, you won't have any clothes on your back. Fortunately, parents take good care of us. Verse number 16. And this is also a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? I love it. Wealth like wind can't be bottled up. Oh yeah, I put it in my bank account. You can't stop wind. You ever try to do that? I'm going to catch the wind, put it in a bottle, or save wind. You can't. You can't grab onto it. Well, yeah, but I get my money in my hand, and I'm going to hang on to it. I'll put it on my mattress. I'll put it in my wall. I'll put it in my floor. I'll put it in a bank. You can do what you want. You can't stop inflation. You can do what you want. But Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 23, labor not to be rich. Cease from mine own wisdom. For riches, riches make themselves wings. I love that phrase. Make themselves wings and fly away as an eagle toward heaven. It's like catching something that doesn't want to be caught. That's money. It just has a way of getting out of our hands, getting out of our bank accounts, doesn't it? And when God sees Christians starting to get too interested in money, he pulls it. Verse 17, look at the tragedy. We're almost done. Hang out with me. Verse 17, all his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath with his sickness. This is the tragedy of the wealthy. They hoard their money, they love their money, and they won't spend it on the electric bill because they're too cheap. They will eat in darkness. They will eat in loneliness. And when they get old, with all their money, they'll be miserable because there's a lot of sorrow there. And their money that they thought would get them through all the health care problems, they find out it doesn't buy them any companionship. What this verse is saying is the person who makes money their goal will not take their wife out for dinner because it's too much money. It's impractical. The man who makes money, the woman who makes money their wealth is they'll eat in darkness. They won't spend the money to do something special with people that mean something to them. And over time, the people that they thought meant something to them say, I'm out of here because money's more important to you than I am. And you're going to eat in darkness. You're going to eat alone. And when you're old, you'll have nobody by your side. You'll have all your money, but you'll have nobody. This is why Ecclesiastes chapter 4, he talked about money and how two are better than one, and you've got to choose relationships over riches. It's Ebenezer Scrooge. I got my money, but I got nobody. And what Solomon is urging us to ask ourselves is, why are we working? Why do you go to work tomorrow morning? Why do you go to work Tuesday morning? Why do you work as hard as you do? Is it to be rich? Because if it is, abandon that. Have an awareness of God. God makes the earth profit. God makes the earth profit for all people. Are we working to be rich, or are we working to put food on the table? Well, of course, Pastor. I'm trying to put food on the table and provide for my family. Well, let me ask you this. Are you working to put food on the table for your family, or are you working to put food in your belly for the next 300 years? Because it's never enough. You never know. Are you working because you love stuff or because you love people? Are you working because you love financial security or because you love relationship harmony? You know what your money should be used for? People. People. Preach. Somebody tell me to preach. What's this have to do with God? God is the provider. God is the profiter. God is the one who gives. And as Job said, God is the one who takes. Solomon ain't no backslidden dude. He is a smart guy that's saying, get your eyes above the sun as you live under the sun. Last but not least, verse number 18, have an awareness of what you welcome into your life. And this goes into what we just read. Verse 18, behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him. For it is his portion. In contrast to the man who loves silver and eats in darkness, this man eats and drinks and enjoys the good of all his labor. For this man, a feast is worth the money. For this man, a family is worth the money. For this man, he realized when God blesses, he blesses for us to enjoy it. Not to be irresponsible, not to throw money away for the sake of spending it. But this person realizes, wait a minute, I'm being blessed right now so that I can be a blessing, so that I can enjoy the blessing. Verse number 19, every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. Now, don't take this the wrong way, because I realize in a congregation of our size, there's a complex and diverse number of situations regarding health and healthiness of people. So I say this very carefully. However, the text in its most basic meaning is saying this. If God has given you substance, and listen now, if God has given you the power or the ability to enjoy that substance, there is no greater gift in life. I tell young couples to do something very irresponsible. I don't take my counsel, but I tell young couples, get away. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be luxurious. But I say, get away. Without the kids? Without the kids. And then when you come back, go somewhere with your kids. Because if you have the ability to go and do, that is the gift of God. Because that won't always be here. So many people work their entire lives thinking, when I retire, that's when we'll experience each other. Someday, we're going to do that. The dreaded someday almost never comes. If you right now have the ability to eat the blessings that God has given to you, you need to stop and realize there is no greater gift outside of eternity, of course, but there's no greater gift under the sun to have the power to take the portion that God gives you and enjoy it. This is life under the sun when God blesses. Verse 20 will be done. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. That means when God blesses with wealth, and we have it in this nation, when God blesses with health, and many of us have it, you'll not focus on yesterday, the evil days of your past. When you realize that money comes from God, and you live your life with that awareness, then you'll enjoy the answer of God in your hearts. This is the third time in 5 chapters that Solomon says, hey, pay attention. If you can work, if you can eat, if you can sit down with your family and have a meal, there is nothing greater in this world. It's the gift of God. Stop getting so crazy. Stop running around and just realize God has blessed you. And we have to have an awareness of God when we welcome blessings into our life so we don't throw those gifts away. Welcome it as a gift. Opportunity, ability, wealth, you may think you earned them, but this chapter tells us it's God who gives them. It's God who gives them. Some of us can be so responsible, some of us can be so paranoid that we waste the gift of God. And we waste the gift of God simply because we lack an awareness of God. Some of us are scared more of what we can't see in this world than appreciating and trusting the one we can't see in another world. Let us not miss in the rapidity of events, in the busyness, the multitude of activity and business, let us not miss the blessing of God right here, right now. Let us partake. Let us embrace it. For tomorrow, we may die. And then we fly away to be with God who is in heaven while we are on earth. Let's stand and have a word of prayer.